We live in our world with rocks. And whether we're doing landscaping, some of you get to do any landscaping yesterday? A little bit of landscaping, at least moving the dirt around and stuff. And you know, we think of rocks in our context, in our place. Rocks tend to be obstacles that need to be gotten out of the way, or stuff that you pile up, or they get heaved by the frost. If you've got some beautiful landscaping from last summer, this has been a winter with lots of good, solid, hard freezes. Rocks can tend to move. So, in our time and place, in 2009, when I say isolated, alone, out of context, my God is a rock. One problem is, we kind of visualize something like this. I mean, the image starts to wobble, it starts to heave in the frost. It's not a very stable image. It doesn't speak volumes to it, but it's familiar, we're used to it. We can go somewhere with it. Move us one more, man. But if you go into the world of the Bible, if you accept what it's saying on its own terms, I'm not trying to override anybody else's own understanding. If you go into the land of Scripture, a land that is bleak and barren and desert, and large stretches of it open to the pounding of the merciless sun. When I talk about pounding, if you've never been in a desert in the heat of noontime, there's all kinds of stuff in the Psalms that just isn't real to you. When you get out there, you can feel what it means for the sun to literally beat down on you. It feels like a physical force. And then you come to a rock. Something that doesn't move, that is stable and steady on the horizon. And when you come up to it and around it, and you get on the north side of it, where the sun never quite shines, and you walk up and press your cheek up against that rock, and how does it feel? You know it in your bones, don't you? It's cool. There's shade. There's a respite from what you feel when you walk back out on the desert. And in fact, it is a geological reality when you find a rock like this in a weary land. Very often at the base of that rock, you're going to find springs, living water, the water of life. Because if you spend much more time out there in the desert, you're going to die. But when you find a solid rock in a weary land, and you get on the cool side of it, and you drink from that spring, you move literally from death to life. And when you need a place to stand against your enemies, whether it's a pack of hyenas that have been chasing you through the morning, or whether it's actual, physical, literal human enemies who are chasing you down. If you want to get some advantage of terrain, if you want to get to a high place, if you want to be in a stronghold, you need a rock. All of a sudden, that whole passage reads differently, doesn't it? My God is a rock, my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. That whole verse now means something different, doesn't it? Well, when I think about my God as a rock, I think about how people struggle, I think unnecessarily, with questions around Genesis and around creation. When we say our God is a creator God, do we mean that literally? Well, yeah, we do. But then people get into literal meanings where they try to chop that down into narrow enough slices, and it gets turned into a test of fellowship. It gets turned, I'll admit, in some quarters into, well, you're not really a part of us. You're really not in the right circle of God's love if you can't read this verse exactly the way we do. And I think the circle of the kingdom, and I think our ability to understand what's going on in Scripture is no more complicated there, it doesn't have to be, than it is to say, you know, when some of us hear my God is a rock, we hear it one way. With a little bit more context and understanding, it doesn't make God a pebble on the beach. It expands our understanding of what it means to talk about a creator God. And I think you ran into a version of this. You were staying up late watching television. Which normally, I'd be chastising someone for that. But
well,
there's good stuff out there.
Yeah, and there's been such, in our culture, there's been such a controversy over all this. And there is a lot of pressure, I think, for Christians to either take one side or the other. Either you're going to take the scientific understanding or you're going to take a biblical understanding, but the two, like you said before, are completely separate. And it's interesting, and this is so weird because the time changed last night, and I was like, oh, I got to get to bed early because it's going to be an early morning. And then this show comes on, and it's just talking specifically about the stuff we're talking about today. And I started to talk about the scientific discoveries throughout the ages which led us to understand more about the universe and about the stars and about the rotation of the planets. And for a long time, Christians and the church preached that the earth was the center of the universe. Imagine that, that we thought that man and the earth were the center of the universe because if God created us and we were his primary thing, then we had to be at the center. And so for hundreds of years, the church, believed that and taught that the earth was the center of the universe. And then along came people like Copernicus. And I'm not a historian, and I have to just glean this stuff again because I must not have listened in high school or didn't retain it. But, here's a guy who, basically was discovering that everything was not revolving around the earth, but around the sun. And so then he had to consider whether to speak those truths or not because the whole church believed that everything revolved around the earth. And so for him, it was a choice of major persecution to say, well, science is telling me some facts that tweak how we understand Scripture. And he waited till his deathbed to say that. He waited till he was on his deathbed to begin to speak those scientific discoveries because he knew that it would cause massive persecution in the church. And so, the thing that I watched last night talked about that. And then it was so interesting how the next guy began to develop the telescope. Do you know who that was, by any chance? You know who began? Don't say it, Jeff. Galileo. Okay? He began to... No, none of you listened in high school, did you? Yes! I feel like I'm right at home. And so Galileo, he began to develop the telescope. And for the first time in history, people could see beyond what the naked eye could see into space. And he confirmed what Copernicus had said. And here's what really amazed me about this, was that Galileo made this quote. He said, "The Bible tells us how to get to heaven, not how the heavens go." A quote from Galileo. It makes a lot of sense to me that if we try to cram what we understand about science, if we try to cram that into a biblical perspective, that we have to back up a minute and say, wait a minute. When God used the biblical writers, did they understand the world in a scientific term like we do? Did they think the world was flat? Did they think the world was round? What was their perception of the world? Was it 100 square miles or 10,000 square miles? What was it for them?